Hi everyone, welcome back. So this is the second video in the UiPath data service series. Let's see our agenda. First, we are going to see how do we create an entity in the UiPath data service. Post it, we are going to see what is the difference between a system defined and a user defined fields. After that, we are going to see how do we create relationship among entities. And at the end, we are going to insert some of the sample data in the entities we create. First step is to create an entity. So before we create an entity, we should have first the data services enabled on the tenant. To enable the data service on the tenant, please visit the first part of the video. Now to create an entity, we first go to data service. The page will be blank by default, so it says create new entity, and we can create new entity by clicking the plus button here or here. So when I click on this button, create new entity, so just remember we are just creating a table. So if you are aware of the SQL, this is same like creating a table in the SQL. Okay, so which all entity we are going to create. So if I just go back to the example, this was the slide which we were discussing last time, right? So we were extracting invoice number, invoice date, and all these details we are extracting from the PDF. And later on we decided what if we want to have the data separated in different tables or different data services. So we thought of dividing into different entities such as client, invoices, and invoice line items. Going with the first one, if I want to define the first entity, the entity name is client. We come to the create new entity and name it as clients. So by default the display name is copied to the name field, so the display name can be alphanumeric and it can accommodate up to 3 to 20 characters. So if you'll go to the docs.uipath.com, so it says the display name can be alphanumeric, but it must start with a letter and it can have up to 3 to 20 characters. Okay, so by default I leave it as client. So in the description I'll just write this as entity for clients, and I hit save. So this is how you create an entity. So let's quickly go ahead and create entities for invoices and invoice line items. So I go ahead and create new entity. I name it as invoices, entity for invoices, hit save. Similarly, invoice line items, I go here, I go to entities. So we have created entity for clients, invoices. The last one, I want to create entity for invoice line items. I come here, I just give the name as invoice line items. Okay, the description would be entity for. So this is how we create entities in UiPath data service. So as of now what I have done is I have defined 3 entities: client, invoice line items, and invoices. So creating an entity is same like creating a table in the SQL database. Now that we have created entities, clients, invoice line item, and invoices, so the next step is to create the fields. When I say field, it is same like creating the columns in a table. So we have created a table called client. Now I want to create a column for the table. So to create a field, we click on the entity. So whenever we click on the entity, you see by default we have something which is already provided by UiPath, such as ID, created by, created time, updated by, and updated time. So these are nothing but the system defined built-in fields. We do not have option to edit or delete this one. So whenever we create an entity, by default 5 fields are already provided by UiPath, which we call the system defined fields, and any of the field which we define on the top of this are called the user defined field. So now our next objective is to create the user defined field. So going back to the entity, so now for the client one, so all those which are highlighted in dim are the system defined fields, and for our entity these are the 3: so name, address, and the email. So I go back, I hit create new field, name. Okay, so when I select the name, so now the next is what type of data I want to store in the name field. So I have the option of text, number, boolean, date time, relationship, choice set, and file. To know more about this, we can always come to docs.uipath.com and read about this. Text, as the name suggests, it can store the text. Number, yes no for a boolean. Date time is to store a date time variable. Relationship, I'll just going to talk in a bit. Relationship and choice set, let's park it for a little while and then we can talk about it. And file, if you want to store a complete file. So this is the field types which we can have in the UiPath data service. Coming back to the UiPath data service, so if I go back to the diagram, so we want to have text, name as text, address as text, and email as text. Okay, so I go ahead and hit text. If I want this to be required, okay, so I want this value to be mandatory, so I just hit go ahead and hit the required text box. More details, what is the maximum amount of length I want to have. So if it is name, I do not want to have it to the 200. I just want to restrict my name only to, let's say, 20, length 20. And if I want to have some default value, I can go ahead and provide the default value. And in the description, I can just go ahead and say name field. So I have created my first user defined field called name. Next, I want to go ahead and create new field for address. Type text required, and address I can have up to 200. I just leave it to default, and I will say I'll just provide the description address field, and the last one was email. Create new field, I call it email text, it is required. Okay, and email I want to restrict it to, let's say, length 100. I don't want a default value, and the description as hit save. So now what I have done is, for the client entity I have created 3 new user defined fields: name, email, and addresses. So for every entity, these are the, whatever we create is called a user defined field, and by default we have 5 entities which are provided by the UiPath data services that are called the system defined fields. Now coming back to the entities, so this is the entities which we haven't touched as of now. So if we'll just open, you will see there are 5 default entities. So we can always come here and see the count from here. This is having 8 fields, this is having 5, this is having the 5 default field. Now that we have created an entity for the clients, now the next objective is to create an entity for the invoices. So the invoices has 1, 2, 3, 4 user defined fields: invoice number, invoice date, company, and the total. So if you'll see the company, so the company is of type relationship, which means that the invoices should be of a valid client. So the name of the client will be a foreign key for the invoices. When I say foreign key, it is the relationship. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the invoices entity, and we'll see how we can create a relationship as well. We come back to UiPath data services, we go to the invoices entity. So invoices entity is already created. Now you have to create 1, 2, 3, 4 user defined fields. The first one is invoice number, that is of type text. We click on the create new field. First one is invoice number. Okay, so if you'll see, whatever the display name I have given, I have put a space. It has already removed the spaces, and I'll just keep it to the default settings. So it is of type text. Hit on save. Next we have something called invoice date. I'll go ahead create new. I just type invoice date. So now this would be of type date time, and I want to just hide the timestamp as it is required, and I want to save it. Next I want to have a called total. Okay, I'll just go ahead and create an entity called total, and it will be of type number. It is required, and hit save. The last field I have to create is company, and it is of the type relationship. So how do we do that? We just first create new field. We just name it as company name, and the type now it would be relationship. Now UiPath data service will ask which entity you want to refer. So for us, I want to refer to the client entity, and which field of the client entity, so that is the name. So if I just go back to the diagram, you will see the name of the name field of the client entity is a relationship to the company field of the invoices. So how do we do that? Define the entity, select the type as relationship, select the entity, and select the field name. So this is required, and I hit and go ahead and click on save. Now if you'll see, we have created the company name, invoice date, invoice number, and total as the user defined field. So a good practice we should have given the description. We can always go ahead and edit the invoice date, let's say this one, and add a description here called field for date, and hit on save. Okay, so this is how, so whenever we create a relationship, so this is how it is displayed. So now this is how we create an relationship. So what we have done is, so we have created a relationship of the name field of the client entity to the company field of the invoices. Now that we have created two entities, client and invoices, and we have managed to create a relationship between the client and the invoices, let's try to fill up some of the data in the entities we just created. We start with client. So whenever you open an entity, there is a tab called data. The data tab displays whatever the data which is having in this entity. So as of now our client entity is not having any data, so this thing is blank, so we can hit add data here or add new data here, and we can go ahead and add the data. So I go ahead and type the address as ABC colony and the email as my email address and the name of the company as, let's say, ABC company. Okay, and I hit and save the record. Okay, so what happens is now whenever we add in data to the entity, it automatically assigns an ID to the record. These are the three defined fields which we have provided, and other details are automatically added by the UiPath for us. So all the user defined fields are added by the user, and the system defined fields are populated by the UiPath data service. Now since the invoice entity holds a relationship with the client entity, let's try to insert some of the record for the invoices. We go to data, hit on add data. Now if I go back to the diagram, the invoices company is a relationship with the client name. Okay, so if I go back now, I don't have option to type anything here. I just have option to select the data, right? So what I can do is I can just select the company. Okay, so this is how the relationship work. The invoice date is of the type date time, so we are provided with a calendar here. So what I can do is I can go ahead and select the date as tomorrow's date, or I can just go ahead and select today. I can just select the time and hit enter. Okay, in the invoice number I can just provide any INDV001. I can provide an invoice number, and for the total I can just provide a number, and I click on the save button. So now as you can see, INDV001 invoice is already recorded. So this is how we add record to the entities we have just created, and this is how the relationships works. So now in this video what we have done is we have created two entities. We have defined the relationship between the two entities, and we have provided them just with a value. So this value in the ideal scenario will be coming from the UiPath Studio or any of the forms or from the Excel. So this is how the data is visible in the entity. So this is end of this video. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. In the coming part of the video, we are going to see what a choice set is, how do we manage the entities in the UiPath data service, and more of those in the later part of the video. Thank you for watching and happy automation.